You know where we are tonight. I wanted to talk about depravity. What a word, I mean, that's a pretty bad word. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. This is still true. We find, as a matter of fact, I believe it's the last verse in the last book, or I mean, the last chapter of Judges that says this again. In those days, there was no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Okay? And so, and we certainly see that proven out in the last 4 chapters here after Joshua dies. Okay, we're going to talk tonight about a little bit about what's going on, the remainder of some of the campaigns, if you will, mostly Samson, and then we'll get into the issues that Israel had. It just appears that they were influenced so greatly by these nations around them. They just fought with each other, jealousy, not following God's word, idol worshiping, just about everything you could imagine. Murder went on, just all kinds of things. All right, let's talk about Samson for a moment. And let me see if I can get my stuff going here a little bit. Okay. All right, so Samson is really the definition of a tragic hero, if you will. The way that he went about accomplishing what God wanted him to do, yes, he had God helping him, but his way of doing it was about as violent as one could get, And that was his way of saving them. But let's not forget, he was one man. It wasn't an army. Okay, he's one man trying to do the job of what had up to that point been an army that would be rescuing the people, right? And so I think we'll talk about him a little bit tonight, and then see where he ends up. Okay. So Samson is a story of calamity. From almost the very first time we meet him, almost from birth on. He was supposed to be what? Living as a what? A Nazarite, wasn't he? A Nazarite vow. And the Nazarite, and the mother also had to follow, although she didn't have to, her hair may or may not have been involved, but she had to abstain from, she couldn't even eat grapes, okay? Not just abstain from wine, but she couldn't even eat grapes, okay? And so God wanted her to be as pure as she could. And we see that there's other, catastrophes, if you will. What did Esau do? Sells his whole birthright, for some red vegetables, okay, basically. Wasn't even really a good, lamb stew or anything, okay? And we got Saul, we got Samuel. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through, but this was one of the premier examples of someone that was a hero, yes, but tragic, right? His flaws of character, really, that's what was responsible for his downfall, wasn't it? He had many flaws while still performing what God wanted him to get done. You can, in a way, maybe you could see ourselves in Samson in a way. I don't think we have to kill 1,000 people, okay, with a jawbone of a donkey, but I think we see that he might have been flawed in that way, but we're going to look at where he was not flawed, okay? But so maybe one could say, he got what he deserved. The biblical tragedies kind of fall into this picture, right? You have those who start out good, along the way they get too big for their britches, they stop listening to God, and then they fall, right? They fail. It's not that much different than what we see even today in some of the those we know who have reached great pinnacles in this world. It's truly true what they say. The higher they go, the farther they have often to fall. There were 4 times that Israel needed to be delivered, if you will, from the Philistines. And it began with Samson. That was the first one, okay? Chapter 13 and verse 5. And we see also then it continued successfully through with Samuel and his interaction with them. But then we see a stutter step here, right? Saul, he did not do so well, okay, in his interaction with the Philistines and saving them. And, you know, we don't have time. Each one of these we could spend the evening going through, so we're not going to be able to do that. But I do want you to know this idea here that, you know, they had to be saved from the Philistines numerous times. But David was the one who really put it to the end, right? And he put to the end many things during his time, okay? But that's one of them. The Philistines were overcome, were defeated and all by David. And you can see that at the end of Samuel. So one of the things that was part of the cycle, if you remember, is that once they became oppressed, what eventually did they have to do before there was a rescuer? They had to repent, didn't they? They had to cry out to God. Sometimes they offered, you know, sacrifices and so on. This is an example here where you don't see that, okay, in the cycle. The people of the time, it just feels a little bit like they were so fragile in their belief and their faith. They couldn't even muster up the strength, if you will, to create an army. Here's Samson by himself. Okay. As a matter of fact, we see the people just kind of give in. You know, we're in bondage. Okay. As a matter of fact, so much so they kind of acted almost like what's that phrase when somebody who has been kidnapped, you know, kind of falls in with the one who kidnapped them. What was it? Yeah, Stockholm. Thanks. All right, so it's almost like that, okay? Like they've given in, all right? And because the only army we see them mustering is when they go to try to capture Samson, all right? In chapter 15. And so they go with ropes and all. They're going to tie up Samson, and, you know, and Samson lets them do that. But a lot of this is done out of what? Out of picking a fight, right? I mean, that's in a nutshell, that's where we see Samson. You know, Samson wanting to bring things, escalate things to the point where they could fight. Okay. So Samson weakened the Philistines and kept them in check, but he didn't provide a permanent deliverance. Remember, it continued on, and then Samuel had to fight with them too. Okay. And we see that, though, not to be too hard on them, because that goes all the way through to David before they actually are able to put the Philistines, you know, behind them, if you will. So when we look at him, his carnality was sort of in the lead, wasn't it? I mean, he seemed to not think straight when it came to how to live his life, decisions he made, and here's one he did. He married a Philistine woman. Now, we do need to keep in mind that this was at God's in there poking at this, okay? Because he wanted the Philistines to be brought up to a level where they attack him. This is really, there's a lot of effort, I think, where God is trying to destroy a lot at one time with one man, right? Because we know in the end, ultimately, the whole point was to demonstrate to the Philistines that their God was nothing but rock and stone and, you know, etc. And he was alive instead. So he also visits a harlot in Gaza, and then also had his affair with Delilah. He just is all over the place. Just can't really seem to get his life together, and we know that ultimately that was his downfall, right? But in a way, did he not really embody what was wrong with Israel? Because Israel had a weak will, right? They were self-indulgent. In other words, we said that, we saw that at the beginning when we're reminded that everyone did what was, in their own minds, whatever they wanted to do. Also, we just don't seem to know how to handle success. It's true, you almost always worry about someone who makes a meteoric rise, if you will, right? Because it just goes straight to here, doesn't it? And they can't really lead effectively because they can't get themselves out of the way. His sensuality, many of the gods idols that the Israelites were trading, if you will, for God, had to do with it. Had to do with sensuality. Had to do with fertility. Had to do with that side of man and woman. Being overconfident, keeping bad company. We're going to go on. Because this is a good list, I think, to describe how we see Israel acting. And after Joshua passes, we see this downward spiral, if you will, of them. So Samson's all about escalation, if you will. So he's trying to, he's driven by retaliation. We see this in the first three verses here of chapter 15. Okay, because he finds out that his wife, first of all, he runs away, right, and leaves. Okay, after he finds out that his wife had told what was it? His riddle. Okay, answer to his riddle. And so he was mad, so he leaves. He runs home to mom and dad, okay, after that. And then while he's gone, they give his wife away. It's really difficult. We're not there. We don't see how close all of these people were, what they were doing, how they were interacting, or any of that. But for what we can tell here, that there was not really much of a relationship that had been formed from Samson to either her parents or even really herself, given that she was given away then. And then so Samson then escalates the animus between them, and so he wants to strike out. How does he do it? So this is where he goes, isn't it? This is where he goes and he burns the crops, right? If you ever wanted to get your wife back, that's probably was the total wrong direction, right? Let's destroy all of their food. He does that, right? Ties torches to the tails of some foxes, and then he lets them loose. Now the foxes are going to go everywhere, right? Because they're freaked out. Their tails are on fire, as far as they can tell. And so they're running away. And so then the Philistines then retaliate against him, okay, and what he did. So what did they do? And this is the part that I don't quite understand, but they go and they kill his wife and his non-wife, and then his non-wife's parents. It's like, so he goes and he kills them. They kill them. The Philistines do that. We see that in verses 6 and 7. Then Samson repays them in kind. Okay, so now he's irritated with them again. Okay, and so he attacks them. It says hip and thigh. Okay, that is an very old saying that simply means just totally destroyed them. Okay, killed them and destroyed them. I'm going to, just like I'm doing up here. So, where do you think it goes from there? Yeah. So it's the opposite direction that you would want. Oh, thanks. And Judah then comes, and after this happens, and asks basically for Samson to let them capture him, right? And so he, in verses 9 to 13, he does that. Judah takes Samson and turns him over to the Philistines. Now, this is once again another one of those escalations, right? Because, it said 3,000 men of Judah comes to take him and to turn him over to them. Okay. Now, after that, what did that really end up doing? It's now put Samson in the Philistines' hands, right? And he was tied up with ropes that he could easily break, etc. So this was just another way to cause a confrontation. And what has happened in verses 14 to 17? That's where he kills 1,000 of them with the jawbone of a donkey. Right? I'm not sure how a donkey's jawbone lasted to kill 1,000 people. Okay. But it did. Now, it would have been it was fresh, so it was a fresh jawbone. So maybe it wasn't brittle, I don't know, but I can't imagine how that stuck together. But it did. And so he does that. He kills 1,000 of them, the Philistines, with this. And then after that, God does a miracle and provides him with a drink of water. Right? He says he's going to die if he doesn't have water. And so beginning in verses 18 to 20 here in chapter 15, God opens up a rock and allows him to be refreshed, if you will. Now, the reason I put some of that in there is I doubt seriously any normal person without help could have killed 1,000 people. We see in the end here, how does he get his water? God miraculously gives it to him. Okay, so God is using him as God's weapon, isn't he? And I think he's doing the best that he can with one person being the one delivering all of this. Okay, instead of an army. So, in spite of his carnality, God's blessings of special strength continue, don't they? And we know they do continue until he makes the mistake of telling Delilah how to break the Nazirite vow, right? And at that point, then he loses that. After visiting a prostitute, he was able to carry away the city gate. Okay? And you can see that in chapter 16. And once again, just another in your face, right? Because what's the purpose of a city gate? It's protection, right? I mean, you want to be able to close the gate, no one can come in, and so he's basically telling them, you can't get away from me. There's nothing you can do that's going to save yourself. Okay, in this case. But they had been kind of laying low. They were going to kill him. But Samson, kind of caught wind of this, and he beats them to it, right? Once again, though, seeing the harlot is, one of the things that drives him, and he just has this carnality just keeps him from really being able to do everything that God wants done in a way that would, appear to be spiritual, But only when his hair is shaved, then, does the Spirit quit empowering him. And so I think what I want to try to say is, I don't know all of this relationship, between Samson and God. But I do think we can see God was using him, and that God saw him as one person. He used him and accomplished all that he could by using him in this way. But here's some issues that then come from it. Okay, so God's Spirit falls on him, and then he's able to do these great things, right? But he did give the Philistines an opportunity to glorify in their God, because that's what they did in the end. So they put his eyes out. They put him into some menial task that he was supposed to be doing. It's not unusual, or it's not an accident that his hair starts growing out again, which was his original source of strength. I don't know if his hair just had gotten long again, if he could have done all of these things again without God's Spirit coming on him again when he was in the arena with Dagon. Okay, but we see in chapter 16, verses 23 to 24, that Samson is mocked by his enemies. And when they mock Samson, in a way, who are they mocking? They're mocking God, aren't they? And that's how he interacted with them and how his failures, ended up causing him to lose his strength. We see that it led him to allow them then to blaspheme or to mock God. As a matter of fact, in the those verses 23, I think, to 25, it talks about them saying, "Our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy." Okay. Pretty sad statement, isn't it? And they brought him into the big arena when they were having their victory, if you will, gathering in this big arena that had Dagon, a statue of Dagon in there. Okay, and so they were basically saying Dagon was bigger and better than God. That's basically what they were saying, okay? Because he brought them in there. So he was blind, he was imprisoned, and he was mocked. Not, what did I say originally? A tragic hero, right? His last prayer then was to ask God to let him have one last strike against the Philistines, right? And it was a big strike, and a great strike. But it took his life too in the end. And we see then his family comes and picks up his body. So just a couple of points about him. The Holy Spirit was the source of his great strength. We can see that in all these verses. It empowered him to defeat the Philistines. And so God's Spirit was with him and came on him. The presence of his Spirit did not depend on his holiness, because he was not always holy in his actions or what he was engaged in, right? But and so we see that the presence of the Spirit was not something he sensed or felt by the moment. Okay, so in other words, it came on him. Okay, and because of that, he was able to do these great deeds for God. Now, just one more thing, and then we'll leave him behind. He is a great, I think, example for us, both good and bad. But in the end, we find in Hebrews chapter 11 that his name is in the list of those of great faith. So while he was a flawed man, where was his strength? Where did he get his strength from? Well, evidently from faith, from his faith. And he received the second green spot there. He received what God had promised him because of his faith. Okay. I think that, like David and his example, I mean, we can take this various ways, But we can see a flawed person can attain faithfulness and be considered faithful in God's eyes. Hang on here. He was not excluded because of his immorality, nor was he included because of his feats of strength. He was included because his faith was great. That was what was strong. That's what his strength was. By faith, he went alone. Remember, the others all had armies behind them. He was one person trying to defeat and save them, and trusted the Spirit to rush upon him and strengthen him in his time of need. Interesting, isn't it? It's hard. All I can think in the end is God has the power I don't. I don't know all of the ins and outs. And plus, what we saw was just this, right? We had this sort of tight story given to us. We don't know all of what went on, but we do know this. He's in the list of the faithful. And I think that we have to allow God to say that. Okay, we have some really bad stuff to talk about for the rest of the time, so sorry for that. But the Israelites took a turn for the worse, if you will, okay? But these give us examples of what it was like then. It's sort of like now we're sort of ending the Judges, and we're going to go into a novel, okay? All right, so wrong word, okay? It's inspired. But we're going to see what's going on in the world at that time, all right? Micah, in chapter 17, Micah is a person from Ephraim, okay? And it's kind of interesting. He has a mother. He stole money from his mother, okay? Remember, he stole some silver from his mother. He returns it back to his mother. I don't know why all of that was in there, okay? I do think it just shows the depravity, if you will, or the lack of the level of evilness that was going on. And so he brings it back to her. She then gives him some back again, okay? Both of them go make idols. It's crazy, okay? What happens with this. But I've got a few more details that we'll go into this on. But so which did Micah have a right from God to do? Was he supposed to make an idol? No. Was he supposed to make a shrine? No. Was he supposed to choose a priest? No. All of these things that he did, that Micah does, to begin, and it's really interesting that if you could see a drawing, these fingers just all come out of this failure of Micah and the idolatry that goes on. He's sort of like the center of the circle, and all the spokes off of this that happens for the next 4 chapters comes from the fact that he has left God and he's made some gods, okay? Small g, right? Okay. So he returns his stolen money to his mother. His mother makes an image out of it. Okay. Then Micah establishes his own worship. What does Micah do? Micah makes a shrine. Okay, well, what is a shrine? I wasn't really sure exactly, because to me a shrine is something sort of like a statue, but that's not really. A shrine would be a little place to worship. He made it in the house, kind of maybe in a cubby or a corner. It's a place to put the idol, And so he makes this shrine. And then he hires a Levite, right? So here's a Levite, and the Levite was a bad a bad person himself, wasn't he? He's sort of wandering around. Why did he leave where, the Levites were given an inheritance? What was their inheritance? Well, it was a town, right? They were given places to live. They weren't given land like the rest of the tribes, but they were given a place to live, and they were given money, and they were given a stipend, and et cetera, okay? But this Levite decides to leave off on his own. Why? Well, I mean, we know what's going on there at this time. People are doing whatever they want to, right? So Micah established this elaborate worship of his own, which included a shrine and an idol and a priest. He made his son the priest to begin with, right? Then he hires a Levite who comes walking by, who happens to just happen by. I've got a map in here. I don't know how they just happen by, Micah's house all the time. There's 2 or 3 situations happen because of at Micah's house, and when you look at where it is, it's like, how? Why would they be coming through there? Well, he was on the edge of something, of one of the of Ephraim area, and so Dan comes by, right? We'll talk about that in a second, but so he has this false consecration. Who is supposed to consecrate a priest? Who is supposed to consecrate what's used in worship? Where was worship supposed to be being happening at this time? The tent is there, right? They're supposed to be going, and that's where they're supposed to be worshiping. But he makes all of that up himself. Okay. Then come the Danes. Okay, so Dan, the tribe of Dan, was in the list of those who did not clear the land that they had been given. Okay, remember, in the end, when they were calling it done, but really done was there were still areas that had not been conquered. Dan decided it was too hard to conquer their land. Okay, and so when you look at what they were supposed to do and then look at what they did do, you find they're casting around looking for a place to live. So Dan sends spies out to Laish, and they come to Micah's house. Now, first of all, they fall in love with Laish, all right, and so they decide that's the place that they want to live, and so that takes on really almost the rest of the storyline is what happens because of that. But when you look at what they've done, what they do, they see Micah's place, and they say, hey, he's got some gods, he's got a priest, and so they take note of that. Okay, they kind of decide that they want to take him with them. Okay, and so they do that. Right, the Danites meet with Micah's Levite. Okay, and I'm not going to call him a priest because he really was not to be a priest. And they choose Laish for their possession. So how, when you do that in this day of age that we're reading about, how do you do that? When you say you're going to choose a place for your possession. Yeah, you're going to bring your army and you're going to kill them. Okay? And so that's what Dan decides that they would do. And they assemble an army and they go and they take possession of Laish. Okay? And it's interesting, they couldn't fight for their own allotment, right? They didn't form an army to go and conquer the land they had been given, right, for the inheritance. Instead, they go look somewhere else. Maybe they were softer, I don't know, but that was their mindset. They wanted to find another place to live. Well, then lo and behold, they take Micah's idols with them. Okay? And Micah takes umbrage with that. Okay, so we'll see how that turns out. But they take his idols and his Levite. It sounds pretty strange. But Micah then pursues them but cannot fight them. So Micah, he's mad, but he goes up there to try to take his idols back, and they just say, basically laugh at him, really. And so when you think about that, one comment. If you look at 22 to 24 in chapter 18, you're going to see that all of this foolishness that Micah did comes to really nothing, okay? Because all of that is taken away from him. And they basically said, stop following us or we're going to turn on you. And then we find Dan taking this area of Laish. Now this is all leading up to something, all right? And that's why I'm kind of moving along a little bit here. Because Dan then adopts Micah's idolatry. Okay? So it starts with one person. Oh, I got a great idea. Let's make an idol and let's make a shrine. And he made an ephod and all of this, and gets a Levite. Okay, and now that's gone over and apostatized Dan, right? So the next three chapters are really a wild ride, right? There's another Levite that we find out in chapter 19 that is, let me see if I can get back to my notes here on that. So chapter 19, we see a Levite has a concubine. They have an issue. They're not, they have some issues between them, okay, between the Levite and his concubine. His concubine, I don't want to go through all of that, but his concubine lays with someone else, and so he takes her back to her father. He's going to leave her, but then he comes back. He takes her with him. Okay, so now the Levite and the concubine, even though all of that is talked about in here, they get back together. Okay, he reconciles with his family. Okay, and we see that in the first 10 verses there. And they start to travel, so they get together. All of that is the first 10 chapters where they had an issue between them, and now they got back together again. Okay, but then they decide to travel. They're still traveling, and they go to a town called Gibeah. Okay, and I think I have, I have a map of Gibeah. Okay. And I think I have a little bigger. All right, so see the red circle is Gibeah, where Gibeah is, and it's right on the edge of Benjamin. You got north of it's Ephraim. Here's Benjamin, okay? And we see that they stay in Gibeah, and the people of that town decide that they wanted to come, and some of the perverted ones in town wanted to come and be with the men there. The man of the house turns his daughter out loose on them and the concubine. The long story short is they kill the concubine. The Levite then gets irritated from that and a war is going to ultimately start. The Levite draws the nation together. He dismembers her, sends her body to the 12 tribes, okay, and says, I want to meet, and now they want to have a war, okay. And so let's walk through this. So the abuse occurs. Benjamin refuses to turn over the criminals, and this is where we're headed. Civil war now, right? Civil war against Benjamin. So they have some trouble. Israel loses the first battle with Benjamin. Israel loses a second battle with Benjamin. Even though they both went to God and asked him, should we go fight? And God said, go fight. But they lost those two battles. God was teaching them a lesson. It's also going to be teaching Benjamin a lesson, because in the third, they ask God again, and the third time they win. Okay, they win the third battle. Now, an issue happens from that. Remember the issue? They killed so many of Benjamin that there weren't enough wives left for them, and they basically are saying that the tribe of Benjamin was going to go away. Okay. I'm working on it. Okay, so I know it's over. I'm just going to say a couple things. So they made a foolish oath that said, if there's anyone who doesn't come and fight, we're gonna destroy them. Okay. So in the end, there's not enough women that are left. So basically, Israel's moral sickness was, in those days, there was no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And there's a whole lot that they do to try to help get Benjamin women again so they could have wives. But God was not happy either that they had gone too far and destroyed Benjamin. All right, that's the best I could do tonight. Thank you, everyone, and I enjoyed it. I learned a lot through the process. Thank you.